Most of us walk through life assuming the universe is a finished product. We treat reality like a spectator sport, stepping through a world made of fully formed, independent objects that are just sitting there waiting for us to look at them. But to process the world, our brains must perform a much more active task. To navigate, we instinctively draw boundaries, slicing up the environment to separate this from that. We make these cognitive distinctions to survive, but almost immediately we suffer a kind of selective amnesia. We forget our own role in carving up the scenery, a cognitive blind spot we might call the lost hand. These lines from the poem Something Real point exactly to this blind spot. We don't see what we make the seeing, then lose the hand that drew. We often inherit our own perceptual incisions and treat them as though they were inherent properties of the universe. The distinct items we interact with every day are the direct result of this unexamined boundary making, appearing as isolated objects only because we have stopped noticing the hand that drew the line. If we are the ones secretly generating the boundaries of reality, it forces a question: what actually exists before we look at it? The minimalist layout in the poem Nothing Real strips away the noise to show us. The text breaks down into white space, dark space, space. It describes a before state that isn't empty, but rather a dense, unconditioned field of potentiality, similar to what physicists call quantum superposition, where multiple possibilities exist simultaneously. In this state, there are no individual objects. There are no edges, no boundaries, and no names. It is an unbroken, silent tide. In its base state, reality is an undivided whole. It lacks the physical isolations and distinct categories that we rely on to define our lives. To navigate that undivided sea of potential, a living organism has to make an incision. We must carve out a specific piece of the whole to interact with it. This maps to quantum decoherence. An environment interacting with a quantum system forces a hazy cloud of possibilities to collapse into a single state. Our inquiry acts as this exact intersection. By looking, we carve a single thing out of the void. You can see this mapped out in the poem The Between Reel. The sequence of interference, decoherence, measure suggests that reality is the active interference occurring between the perceiver and the raw potential. This collision between our perception and the infinite produces what we call a physical object, a temporary, localized byproduct of the observer's cut. This boundary is the seam. It represents the razor-thin limit of human perception. When you draw a boundary, the stroke that defines a thing simultaneously defines what it is not. This dividing line doesn't belong to the bright or dark edge. It's the active relationship making both sides possible at exactly the same time. Yet we instinctively tried to deny this interdependence. We obsess over the separate halves while ignoring the unified stroke that binds them together. The boundary we perceive as the solid edge of the physical world is actually the active, relational seam of our own localized perception. If our observation is the knife that carves the object out of the void, we run into a logic-breaking question. Who is holding the knife? We like to imagine that the observer exists safely outside the system, peering in at the universe through a clear glass window. But the geometry of reality doesn't work that way. The cut that isolates the thing is the exact same cut that creates the localized observer. It creates a paradox. We cannot stand on either side of a perceptual cut that actually cut us first. We are not separate beings examining the universe from afar. We are the universe, drawing a temporary boundary within itself just to experience form. Because the observer and the observed are co-created in the very moment of that cut, reality can never be fully settled or finalized. This perspective moves existence away from a static state. Instead, it functions as a continuous verb, requiring constant participation. Look at the closing lines of this piece. They define this continuous relational feedback loop perfectly. What makes a thing is the asking, still entangled, still open, still becoming. Accepting this concept of the asking requires a kind of surrender. We have to let go of our need for absolute definitions and rigid categories, intentionally leaving space for the universe to remain fluid. The world stays alive, and we stay real only as long as we keep the question open.